To start your still life of simple forms, you're going to need a sharpened number 2 wooden pencil and an eraser and your sketchbook. To begin drawing your simple forms, start by marking where you think the edges of the forms will end. So my box is the farthest to the left, I'm marking where I think that would end. The cone is farthest to the right, cylinder is the tallest, and the bottom of my sphere is the lowest point. So I'm marking those 4 points where I think they would end. Now that I have those 4 points marked, I'm going to start drawing each of my forms. I'm going to start with the sphere because it is the lowest and it is the form that is in front of all of the other forms. I am drawing that one first because I don't want to have to erase part of a form to draw another one because it's sitting in front of that form. As I'm drawing my sphere, I'm keeping in mind where that sphere is in relation to the other forms. So there's a lot more form on the right side of my sphere than there is on the left side, so I am putting my sphere closer to the left side, keeping in mind where the left side of that box ends because it is the farthest point to the left. Now that I'm done with my sphere, I'm going to move on to the box or rectangular prism behind it, and to start that, I need to find the Y, like I showed you in class. So I'm going to hold up my pencil and with my eye line it up with that vertical line of the Y and then lay my pencil down on the paper to get the right angle. But again, I'm keeping in mind where the end of the box is in relation to the sphere. How far away is that bottom corner from the sphere? And I'm drawing that line. Now I'm going to hold my pencil up and line it up with one of the other top lines of the Y, and I'm kind of keeping my pencil parallel to my paper as I line it up with my eyes so that when I lower my pencil, I can find the angle that I need to draw that in really easily. Now I'm going to do the same thing with the last top line of that Y, holding my pencil up, lining it up with my eyes, laying it down on my paper, and drawing that line at the correct angle. So now that I have the Y drawn, because every line of that rectangular prism or box is going to be parallel to another one of those 3 lines from the Y, I can just go in and draw the rest of my box. This is where a ruler will come in really handy. I'm not using a ruler, but it may come in handy for you. When I draw this bottom line that's going to go behind my sphere, I'm going to have to draw a line very lightly through the middle of my sphere so that I can line up that line with the other side of the sphere correctly. But if you have a ruler, you can just line your ruler up and just skip over the sphere. Now, as I'm drawing this, I'm having to adjust quite often. I'm going to realize in a moment that I have drawn the box a little bit too large. I look at the size of the box compared to the sphere that I'm drawing, and I just notice that the top of the box is a little bit too high compared to the actual still life in front of me. So I just go in and fix that. Now I'm going to move on to the cone because I can see more of it compared to the cylinder. Now I am looking at where the bottom of that cone touches the edge of my box from my point of view, and I can see that it's towards the bottom. I'm drawing the cone first because I can see a lot more of it than I can of the cylinder, and if I have to adjust and erase and fix anything, I'm going to have less to fix if I do the cone first. If you notice, the top of this cone is not actually pointed and it has a hole in the top, but you guys can go ahead and make the top of the cone pointed. I didn't teach you how to do the hole in the top. If you would like to challenge yourself with that, please go ahead and try, but you can just make the cone pointed at the top. Now that I'm happy with my cone, I'm going to move on to my cylinder. I am paying close attention to where the cylinder touches the top of the box so that when I draw those lines, I'm drawing them from the points where the edges of the cylinder intersect with the top of my box. I am trying to be as accurate as I possibly can while looking at the still life that I am drawing. I want it to look as much like reality as I can make it look. Now that I've finished drawing my forms and I'm happy with the way they look, I'm going to start looking at where the dark areas of my forms are and where the shadows are. I'm talking about the shadows that are being cast by other forms onto the table and onto the forms that they are sitting beside. You can see here on the cone, there's a shadow cast by the box. There's also a shadow cast here by the sphere on the table and the box behind it. So I'm going to make sure that when I draw these shadows, I'm getting all of them, the ones that are on the forms and the ones that are also on the table. So I've noticed as I'm drawing these shadows that I currently have floating forms because I didn't draw the table line. The table line is going to be behind the forms. You can see that in the video here that the table line is intersecting with the cylinder and cone behind it. So when you're drawing your table line, look at the sides of your forms to see where that table line touches those forms so that you can draw it in the right place. Now I am lightly marking out where the darker parts of my forms are going to be, and when I shade, that line is not going to show anymore because I'm going to blend it out. Now that I've finished drawing my forms and my shadows and I'm happy with them, I'm going to start shading. Now remember in class when we did these simple forms by themselves, you learned how to shade in 2 directions. Please make sure you are doing that with this assignment as well. Please do not smear or try to blend your shading with your finger. It will make it look messy, and I want you to learn how to shade and create smooth shading with just your pencil. That is why you need to do 2 directions of shading. Remember, those 2 directions of shading can be figured out by the edges of your form. Like the cylinder, we have vertical and the curved shading that follows the curve of the ellipse at the top. Now remember, as you're shading, you want a nice smooth transition from dark to light. So please make sure that you don't have a line where it's dark on one side and light on the other. You want it to be nice and smooth and a gradual transition from light to dark. Remember, the light side is going to be the side that is closest to the light source. Now, if there's a cast shadow on another form, like you'll see on the cone or on the box from the sphere, those shadows do not need to have as gradual of a transition. As you'll see on the cone in a moment when I'm shading it, the shadow that's cast by the box, I do not worry about making a smooth transition from dark to light between that shadow and the light part of the cone because it is a cast shadow and I want it to look like a cast shadow and not like the shading on the form. So make sure you are really paying attention to the different values in your still life. Make sure that you can tell the difference between each side of the box and the difference between the different forms. Now remember that shadows need to be darker than the darkest side of your object. So you can see here I'm having to darken the part of the cone that is the shadow from the cube because it was starting to blend together with the side of my cube. I want each of my forms to look like separate forms and I don't want them to blend together. Now, as I'm shading my sphere, I am noticing the reflected light that is towards the bottom of my sphere. I am making sure to keep that as I'm shading so you can see that lighter spot towards the bottom of my sphere. I'll also notice as I start shading the shadow that is on the table from my sphere that there is actually a lighter spot towards the back of the sphere closer to the box, and that is where the light is shining between the sphere and the box and hitting the table there. So I need to make sure that I keep that light spot there as well. Now the last thing I'm going to do is erase any smudges, any fingerprints that I may have put onto my paper. I want it to be a nice clean background, so I'm going to erase and clean up my paper and make this look really nice. Now you may have noticed throughout this process that I erased quite a bit at multiple different stages, and that's totally okay. Especially during the drawing stage, you may find out that you're not going to get it on the first try and you're going to have to adjust. You're going to have to move things because it doesn't look quite right. That's okay. That is the process of drawing a still life. You have to really pay attention to where you're putting things and the proportions that you're drawing stuff in so that it looks as much like the actual thing as possible. So here's my finished still life. Now it is your turn. Good luck.